His last wish before execution to see his dog, but what happened changed everything. The last request. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about justice, loyalty, and the last moments of a man's life. The morning of Daniel Harper's scheduled execution began like no other. The prison felt different, as if every cinder block carried the weight of the countdown. The metallic jangle of keys, the hollow echo of boots across the concrete tier, even the heavy sighs of correctional officers, all seemed sharper, heavier, infused with the gravity of finality. Death Row had its rituals, and this was one of them. Inside his narrow cell, Daniel sat on the edge of his cot, wrists resting loosely on his knees, eyes locked on the cold floor beneath him. He was no longer the fiery young man who had walked into Stonewall Penitentiary 7 years earlier, burning with denial and bitterness. Time had whittled him down. Regret carved new lines into his face, softened the defiance that once blazed in his gaze. He looked older than his 40 years, like a man already carrying ghosts on his shoulders. The guards had seen it all before: broken men begging for clemency, hardened criminals scoffing at the system, even some who joked their way to the chamber. But Daniel was different. He didn't ask for special food, didn't demand phone calls, didn't scrawl furious letters in the hours before dawn. He waited quietly, almost serenely, as if already halfway gone. When Warden Mitchell entered the cell block, the guards straightened. He carried with him the same clipboard he always did on execution day. His voice was low, almost ceremonial. "Harper, you're entitled to a final request." "What will it be?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The usual answers flashed through the officers' minds: steak dinner, fried chicken, a carton of cigarettes, a chance to call family one last time. Some had even heard stranger ones: a pint of ice cream, a deck of cards, a priest who never arrived. But Daniel lifted his head and spoke words none of them expected. "I want to see Max," he said. His voice was low but steady. "My dog." A ripple of confusion passed through the guards. Some exchanged glances, brows furrowed. A condemned man choosing a dog over family or faith. Unheard of. One officer muttered under his breath, "You kidding me?" But Daniel didn't flinch. Max, the German shepherd he had raised from a pup. The one who never left his side until the night police tore Daniel from his home. The one pair of eyes that had never judged him, never doubted him, even when the world branded him a murderer. In this final hour, Daniel didn't crave absolution from strangers or forgiveness from a society that had already decided his fate. He wanted only to look once more into the loyal eyes that had been his last tether to hope. The warden leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. He had seen bizarre requests in his career, but never this. Bringing an animal into a maximum security facility on execution day carried risk. Security, protocol, optics. His officers debated furiously. "It's dangerous," one argued. "Never been done," said another. But an older guard, Officer Ramirez, spoke quietly, almost reluctantly. "He's had no visitors. No letters. Max is all he has left. Let him go in peace." Mitchell studied Daniel's file. Clean record. No fights, no infractions, no escape attempts. In the personal notes, own German shepherd named Max for 8 years. Dog seized at arrest. The warden exhaled slowly. "Against all precedent," he nodded. "Under strict supervision. Yard only. 10 minutes. Word spread quickly through the prison. Some scoffed, calling it sentimental nonsense. Others whispered about the bond between a man and his dog, a bond that no sentence, no wall, no verdict could erase. For Daniel Harper, those 10 minutes would be eternity. Somewhere beyond the razor wire, Max was on his way, and neither man nor dog knew that this reunion, this last request, was about to ignite a chain of events that would unravel everything the prison thought it knew about justice, loyalty, and truth. and as dawn broke over Stonewall, the stage was set for a story that would silence guards, shake the system, and prove that sometimes a dog's instincts are stronger than a courtroom's verdict. The reunion. The prison yard had never been so silent. It wasn't just another morning count or routine drill. Every eye, from guards posted along the watchtowers to inmates peering through narrow cell windows, was fixed on the patch of cracked asphalt where a single metal chair had been placed. Daniel stood beside it, wrists cuffed loosely in front, the chill of the morning air biting through his thin prison uniform. His heart pounded in a way it hadn't in years. He had faced trial, conviction, and 7 years of waiting for death, but nothing unsettled him like this moment, the unknown of whether his dog would remember him after so much time. The far gate screeched open. For a moment, the yard held its breath. Then a flash of black and tan fur trotted into view. Mac. His coat had dulled with age, muzzle flecked with gray, but his gait carried the same familiar rhythm. His ears shot forward, his tail stiffened, and then began to wag, hesitant at first, then faster, harder, as if shaking off the weight of years in an instant. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Max, the officers leading the dog, paused, awaiting the warden's signal. A single nod. The leash slackened. And then Max was running, paws pounding against concrete, body lunging forward with the force of memory. Daniel dropped to his knees just as Max collided into him, pressing his head against Daniel's chest, whining, pawing, licking. A sound broke from Daniel's chest, part sob, part laugh, raw and unrestrained. He buried his face in Max's fur, inhaling the scent of earth and leather and everything that reminded him of freedom. For one suspended moment, the walls of Stonewall Penitentiary fell away. The guards who had doubted, scoffed, or argued about this request stood frozen. They watched a condemned man weep openly, clutching the only soul who had never turned on him. Even the warden, known for his stone-hard expression, felt a crack in his composure. But then the air shifted. Max's body stiffened. His ears swiveled. The steady wag of his tail halted mid-swing. A deep rumble rose from his chest, low, primal, vibrating through Daniel's ribs. Daniel froze, startled by the sudden change. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Max wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes were locked on a man standing at the far edge of the yard. Officer Jenkins. Tall, rigid, arms clasped behind his back, face impassive. The growl deepened, rolling like distant thunder. Max's lips curled, flashing teeth. It wasn't the sound of reunion. It was warning. The nearest guard shifted uneasily. "Control your dog," he muttered, stepping closer. But Daniel knew better. Max had never growled at strangers for sport. He had been loyal, steady, trusting, but when danger lurked, his instincts never failed. Daniel laid a calming hand on his back, whispering, "Easy, boy." Still, Max wouldn't ease. His body stayed rigid, his eyes fixed on Jenkins. The silence grew heavier. Guards exchanged uneasy looks. Jenkins avoided eye contact, jaw tight, his expression a mask of forced calm. Daniel's pulse quickened. He had seen that look before, the face of a man hiding something. And in that instant, something stirred inside Daniel. A realization, faint but undeniable, this moment was no longer just about goodbye. If Max was right, this was about truth. And the truth had just stepped onto the yard. Instincts don't lie. The growl echoed long after the yard fell silent. Even as Max settled against Daniel's leg, eyes never leaving Officer Jenkins, the unease lingered. Guards who had once scoffed now traded wary glances. A dog's instincts didn't appear on reports, but every man present knew they could not be dismissed. That afternoon, Daniel was summoned to a small, windowless interview room. A metal table bolted to the floor separated him from the others. Max was allowed in, an exception the warden rarely granted. The German shepherd sat rigid, ears pricked toward the door as if he already knew who was coming. The door opened. Officer Ramirez entered first, nodding curtly, his presence steady, almost reassuring. Then came Jenkins, posture stiff, eyes flat as glass. The air tightened. Max's throat rumbled instantly, a sharp, guttural growl that made Jenkins falter for the briefest moment before composing himself. Warden Mitchell sat at the head of the table, file in hand. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "Officer Jenkins, there's a question about your role the night of Harper's arrest. Why didn't you disclose that you were present?" Jenkins' jaw flexed. "I wasn't present. I was off duty, passing by. Didn't think it mattered." Max barked once, sudden and sharp, the sound exploding in the small room. Daniel's hand clamped gently on the dog's shoulders, but inside, his pulse quickened. Max had spoken without words, and the message was clear. Ramirez's voice was low but cutting. "Strange. A new witness says they saw a man matching your description leaving Harper's house that night, before the police even arrived." His gaze cut to Jenkins. "That's not in your report." Jenkins' face hardened. "Witnesses misremember. 7 years is a long time." But the warden wasn't convinced. He closed the file deliberately. "Given the circumstances and new testimony, I'm delaying the execution pending review." Daniel's breath caught. For the first time in years, he felt something fragile, something dangerous, hope. Jenkins' eyes flicked toward him, cold, sharp, promising retribution. But Daniel didn't care. In that moment, for the first time since his trial, the ground beneath him shifted. It hadn't been lawyers, or appeals, or sympathetic officials. It had been Max, a growl, a bark. The unwavering instincts of a dog who remembered more than people ever could. The prison thought this was a last request. But Daniel understood now. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And if Jenkins had secrets, Max would drag them into the light. Buried truths. Stonewall Penitentiary buzzed with a tension it hadn't felt in years. News spread fast. Daniel Harper's execution was on hold. In the cold corridors, officers whispered about Jenkins, while inmates traded knowing looks. Few trusted the justice system, but they all trusted one thing: dogs don't lie. The warden had ordered the case files reopened. Dusty boxes were hauled out from storage, reports reread, fingerprints retested with modern technology. And with each passing day, the neat story that had once condemned Daniel began to unravel at the seams. A fingerprint pulled from a shattered glass at the crime scene, once dismissed as inconclusive, was run again. This time, it wasn't Daniel's. It was Jenkins'. Another document surfaced. An arrest report Jenkins had signed, later overwritten in a different hand. Timelines didn't add up. Evidence logged by Jenkins mysteriously lacked chain of custody signatures. The picture grew darker with every page turned. Inside the prison, Ramirez quietly kept watch over Daniel and Max. "Funny thing," he murmured one evening as Daniel stroked the dog's fur. 7 years ago, the case against you came together too fast. Too clean. Now I'm starting to see why." Daniel clenched his jaw. He'd screamed his innocence into the void for years, but no one had listened. Now, because Max refused to be silent, people were finally hearing. The final crack came when a woman stepped forward, an old neighbor who had stayed silent out of fear. She swore she saw Jenkins near Daniel's home on the night of the murder, slipping away into the dark before police lights flooded the street. Fear had kept her quiet. Regret now brought her forward. The warden called another meeting. Jenkins sat rigid in his chair, sweat beading at his temple. "These are lies," he snapped. "Old evidence, old memories. None of it proves anything." But Max didn't waver. The moment Jenkins entered, his body tensed, growl rolling low and unbroken. The sound was primal, undeniable, cutting through every excuse and denial. Mitchell's voice was calm but final. Until this investigation concludes, Harper will not face execution. Officer Jenkins, you are placed under internal review. Effective immediately. Daniel felt a rush of air in his lungs he hadn't realized he was holding. Not freedom, not yet. But possibility. And in the silence that followed, Max leaned against his leg, steady, certain, as though reminding him, the truth always leaves a scent. It can't be buried forever. But Daniel also knew this wasn't over. Jenkins wasn't just fighting for his job or his reputation. He was fighting to keep a deadly secret buried. And men like that didn't go down without a fight. Freedom's Gate. Weeks turned into months, but the case against Jenkins built like a storm that could no longer be ignored. Forensic experts retested every scrap of evidence, peeling away the lies that had bound Daniel to death row. The fingerprints that once condemned him now cleared him. Witnesses silenced by fear began to speak. And each testimony painted the same picture. Jenkins had been there the night of the murder. The trial was swift, relentless. Prosecutors laid out the chain of corruption, fabricated reports, planted evidence, suppressed testimony. Daniel sat in the courtroom, shackles still on his wrists, Max's photo tucked into his pocket. Across the aisle, Jenkins, pale and stiff, avoided his gaze. The man who had once worn a badge now wore chains. When the verdict fell, guilty, the room exhaled as one. Jenkins was led away, face twisted with the fury of a man cornered by the truth he could no longer bury. And then, in a moment Daniel thought he'd never live to see, the charges against him were dropped. The judge's voice was clear, ringing like a bell inside his skull. Daniel Harper, you are hereby exonerated. The gates of Stonewall Penitentiary swung open, not for his execution, but for his freedom. The air outside hit him like a baptism, raw, electric, filled with scents he had nearly forgotten, pine, exhaust, the faint sweetness of rain-soaked soil. And there, just beyond the fence, stood Max, tail wagging, eyes bright, unwavering. Daniel dropped to his knees the instant he reached him. Max bounded forward, knocking him back into the dirt, covering his face in frantic lick. Daniel buried his face in the thick fur, tears soaking the dog's neck. "We made it, boy," he whispered. "We made it. No guards. No shackles. No walls. Just open sky and a second chance." For the world, Daniel's case became a headline about wrongful conviction, corruption, and justice delayed. For Daniel, it was something simpler. He wasn't the man defined by courtroom lies or a death sentence. He was the man his dog had believed in all along. And that loyalty, the growl that shook a prison, the bark that cracked a case, had saved his life. As Daniel and Max walked away together, steps in sync, the world hadn't changed much. But Daniel had. And so had the truth. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from lawyers or judges. Sometimes it comes from a dog who remembers. The echo of loyalty freedom was loud at first, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, officials shaking Daniel's hand. For a man who had spent years in silence, the noise was overwhelming. But once the gates of Stonewall faded behind him, the world grew quiet again. Daniel walked through that quiet with Max at his side. The German shepherd's stride was slower now, but steady, unwavering. Every step was a reminder, Daniel hadn't walked out alone. He had been carried here by loyalty, by instinct, by a dog who refused to forget. In the weeks that followed, Daniel struggled to adjust. The world had moved on without him. Stores he once knew were gone, friends scattered, family estranged. Freedom wasn't simple, it was messy, complicated, filled with reminders of the years stolen. But every night, Max curled at his feet. Every morning, Max greeted him with the same joy as the day they reunited. In those moments, Daniel found something no courtroom could give: peace. He often thought about Jenkins, locked in a cell now, staring at walls Daniel knew too well. Justice had come, but it wasn't sweet, It was heavy, tangled in years that couldn't be returned. Daniel didn't celebrate Jenkins' downfall. He celebrated Max's loyalty. Without it, the truth would have stayed buried. One evening, standing in a quiet field far from the prison lights, Daniel whispered into the fading sunset, "You saved me, boy. You gave me back my life." Max leaned against him, tail thumping softly, as if to say, "I only did what you once did for me." The world had called Daniel a criminal. Max had called him his person. In the end, it was the dog who was right. Because sometimes, justice isn't delivered by judges, juries, or wardens. Sometimes it's found in the unshakable loyalty of a heart that never wavers. And for Daniel Harper, the man who walked free when no one believed him, closure came not with headlines or applause, but with the quiet sound of his dog's steady breathing beside him, a reminder that love outlasts bars, lies, and even time itself.